inform you of the tragedy that we all learned about yesterday. David Von Erich, being the wrestling star that he was on wrestling tour in Tokyo, Japan, and he passed away of an apparent heart attack yesterday in his hotel room. He was with friends and with good people.
One of the biggest questions amongst wrestling fans is whether David Von Erich was actually going to become NWA World Heavyweight Champion in 1984. And what if that actually happened? Would the Von Erich curse be broken? Would Mike, Chris, and Kerry still be alive today? Would Ric Flair have dominated the 80s? Or would the Von Erichs control the NWA title throughout the decade? Would the NWA have flourished and risen to new heights, or would the script play out as it did and the WWF still continue to ascend to the pinnacle of the wrestling heap? So many what-ifs left unanswered. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of What If? And fresh off the heels of a very successful episode talking about Magnum TA and the what if Magnum's auto accident hadn't happened, we're going to go down another path. And this time we're going to talk about a what if about somebody I think that a lot of wrestling fans have asked this question many times. It's David Von Erich. And we're going to talk about what if David had lived longer than he did, had been still involved in that NWA World Heavyweight Title picture, and what would have transpired after that fact. But before we do, I want to introduce my special guest. Once again, returning to join me to talk this topic is Ted the Hillbilly Heel from the Heel Truth Wrestling Podcast. Ted, how you doing? And tell us about what you've got going on with the Heel Truth.
Oh, I'm doing great, BC. I appreciate you having me back here. You know, the 80s, I love the 80s, and I love heels. Yeah. And if you want to hear me talk about heels, Heel Truth, you can find on Spotify, Amazon, Apple, wherever you get your podcast from, okay? You can also, I got a little YouTube channel going now, so you can go over there, Heel Truth Podcast there, subscribe, like, follow, all that. And I'm not on social media, so if you want to contact me, heeltruthpodcast@gmail.com. Send me reviews, tell me what you think about it. I'll read it out on the air, okay? So just hit me up. We talk about heels, and glad to be here.
I appreciate you coming on. I got to say, we had such a tremendous response from viewers about that Magnum TA episode. And it was just kind of fate that the timing of that one came out right around the talk of the Dark Side of the Ring episode about Magnum as well. Did you end up watching that Dark Side episode? I've
not watched it yet. I've not got to watch none of the Dark Side this season. I'm just going to binge them all. I can barely keep up watching what I am watching.
I hear you.
I'll go ahead and throw this out here. Don't want to give any spoilers away, but it took me 4 nights to finish this new Avatar movie. Okay. and I was okay the first one, but this one was and talking about long-term storytelling, that thing lasted about 4 hours, and it took me like 4 nights, and I'd have to watch it and turn it off. So, it's hard to get to something else.
Well, I will say this about the Dark Side, and I'll say this for all the viewers out there. Of course, with the Dark Side, some of these episodes do tend to be very dramatic, very sad, all that. But this is one episode of Dark Side that actually did come out with a positive ending and kind of a happy story. So, if you're going to ever watch an episode of Dark Side, suggest watching the Magnum TA episode. Yeah. Of course, wasn't as good as our episode. I got to say that because I didn't actually answer the question of what if, even though they hinted around to that, but we did in our last episode. Yep. So if you haven't checked out the what if that we did on Magnum TA, make sure you go check that out right after you watch this episode. Getting on to our topic, David Von Erich, another one of those wrestling legends that their career ended very abruptly, way too soon, and one that fans, I think, everywhere across the world, because of the reach that World Class Championship Wrestling had, have always wondered what would have been the case if David had lived and gone on to be NWA World Champion and all that stuff. But we're going to cover that, some questions along that line. But before we do, I'll get pick your brain here, Ted. What are your memories of David Von Erich in the world class territory as a whole?
we finally, I can't remember, we got a little bit of it on TV, and of course the magazines. And it was like at the time, it was almost like when you would see the three brothers there, it was like almost if you were not actually watching every week to see what was going on, it was like almost David was in the background.
Mm-hmm.
Kerry had the look. He had the biceps. He had that look. Kevin, you might see a still photo of him where he's up in the air because he was doing high flying stuff, and he was barefoot. And that was something unique because back in the day, the only barefoot wrestlers were usually from a foreign country. We've talked about foreign heels and stuff like that. But here, this boy from Texas who should be wearing cowboy boots was running around barefoot. And then David was just sort of in the background, but seemed like what little I did remember when I did get to watch it, I could remember when he would cut a promo, seemed like I was more intrigued by his promo than the other two.
Yes. Yeah, I'll agree with you on that. And I'm actually running through early 80s WCCW right now, working on, 83, 84. I've finished 82 up. And you're spot on with that. It's funny. My wife watches along with me a lot of stuff. She loves the old school stuff. Not a fan of today's stuff, but she loves the old school stuff. And I do think she has a bit of a crush on Mr. Kevin Von Erich there with his rippling muscles and stuff like that, and the barefoot wonder. But but she won't admit to it. But come on. Anyways, but you're right on. Like David had that fire in his promo. It was a raw promo. Like, a lot of times you'd see we talked about this in a different episode where you'd see some mess ups and stuff like that during a promo, but he would get that message across. He knew how to deliver the fire. He was the brains of the organization. Yeah. Kerry, of course. Well, Kerry and Kevin, not great promos, I will say that, but they certainly had the look and they certainly had the crowd behind them because the girls were going crazy when those guys were hitting the ring. But I'm like you. I wasn't watching it live when it was happening, but I was getting the magazines, and just to see it, I always felt like world class was this territory that was on fire, and and there was just like this pandemonium amongst the fans as far as this whole territory and this love for the Von Erichs, and then of course the hatred for the Freebirds as well that was going on at that time. And they needed each other, the Freebirds and the Von Erichs, to really make that territory work. But yeah, but then we got into the whole situation where it was one tragedy after another that really just kind of shut that territory down in that situation. And it's unfortunate the way things happen.
Yeah, and when you asked me about doing this episode, and I was trying to go back and research some of my Von Erich lore and some things that I'd forgotten. And it said that one thing I read said David was one of the ones who, I guess, he had seen the Freebirds and talked his dad into about, trying to get them to come in. Yep. And then I remembered the storyline. Then it clicked. I remembered because when the Freebirds first come in and were friends with the Von Erichs, Buddy Roberts hadn't got there or was kayfabe injured or something. Yep. And David won the 6-man title with Terry and Michael, but he said, when Buddy gets here, I'll give it up to him. Yep. that American Texan, USA, good kid, I'll do what's right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It actually, that happened on the same show where Flair and Kerry had the cage match, and that's when the Freebirds turned on Kerry. So earlier in that evening, you had David win the title with them, and he's the one who got the pin even in that match and won them the titles. But yes, you're right. The All-American boy, I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to give it up to Buddy Jack when he gets here, and they'll be the 6-man tag champs. But yeah, and that all came from the fact that David, they kind of sent him to Florida area to get some more seasoning, as you would. And he actually had a chance to be a heel down in the Florida area, tag teamed with Dory Funk Jr. and Terry Funk and people like that, and really went under the learning tree of those guys. Really learned his craft and learned about booking as well from Eddie Graham down there, which ironically, that's the latest Dark Side that's been on. It was a really good episode as well. But he came back to Florida from Florida with all this knowledge and all these connections, because it wasn't just the Freebirds that he got to come up there, but he also got gorgeous Jimmy Garvin to come up. And
Yeah.
of course, they had that memorable feud that they had over the Texas Heavyweight Title, and then of course some of the vignettes that happened,
Yeah.
between them, and just great stuff. And that really was propelling David up the ladder. And although in the early 80s, it was always thought that Kerry probably would be the one that's going to get that title, it soon became apparent that David was the worker and was the one that was kind of destined for it. That's where we'll kind of jump in here with this whole what if. So we'll take it from the fact that, of course, we had David, I forget the date, but it was February of 1984 when he tragically passed away overseas in Japan. But at that time, the belief was, and I think Ric Flair's kind of corroborated this whole story, even Harley Race as well, David was really being groomed to at least have one title run with the NWA World Title. Now, would it have been multiple title runs? Would he have been a long-term champion? That's the question that sticks in minds, because we were getting to that point where it was almost starting to become the title of the Carolinas and stuff like that. So you wonder, first of all, so do you feel that David would have gotten that at least a title run with the NWA World Heavyweight Championship?
Yes, and to be honest with you, I think, and I mean, I've never read this, but I think the whole reason Fritz sent him to Florida and let him do the heel run was so, because I mean, he passed away, he was like, what, 25, 24, 25?
Yeah,
somewhere in there.
At worst, it was 27, but it was in the mid to early 20s. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So this is just me speculating. I've not read this. I've not heard this. But given that it was easier, again, for the NWA champion, especially in the early 80s, 82, 83, 84, to be the heel, Harley or Flair, and go to the other territories, I personally think that's the reason, because, you know, all the stories say that David was going to get a run with it, and I believe he would, because the other thing was he had, right before that, he went into Missouri. I remember seeing that in the magazine. He wrestled Harley to a 60-minute draw.
Yep.
And then he won the Missouri State Championship or whatever that was in that promotion. And I still to this day, and I do not know why this sticks in my mind, but there was a PWI article about all the people who had won the Missouri title and then went on to be NWA champion. Yep. Now, back as a kid, I thought, what's so great about Missouri? You know, and why was this title? Then later on, I learned that Bob Geigel, and that was his territory out there and all that stuff, and him and Harley and stuff. But I think it was sort of a testing run for David to see, okay, can he carry the title as a face, or he's had some heel experience? Do we need to turn him heel and let him go to the territory? Because, again, if I'm booking this, what if he's the world champion, brings it back to Texas, but then he starts putting down one of his brothers.
Right.
And we have a brother versus brother, and he turns heel. Mm-hmm. I mean, you know, that would, man, Texas would have been all crazy then. They'd have been really divided and everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, you're right about it. Was the NWA Missouri Heavyweight Championship, and he won it from Flair, actually, is who he won it from, and then he lost it to Harley. So they definitely had that mix right there. And actually, he lost it to Harley in January of '84. So obviously, and they've talked about that. You go to Missouri, you win that championship, you're being groomed for that championship. I'm kind of with you on that whole heel run with Florida. I think, to me, what they were thinking of is that you're going to have to work heel in some territories, because if you go to Memphis and you got to go against Jerry Lawler, well, Jerry Lawler isn't going to get booed in Memphis, right? So, and that was the role of the NWA World Champion, to go into each territory, work with their top guy and put him over and make him bigger, and you know, without losing that title, of course. But you know, you had to do the run. So in some territories, the top guy was a massive baby face like Jerry Lawler. In other territories, it might have been a heel on top. Maybe it's Flair in the Carolinas, right? Or Harley in Missouri or something like that. So I think you're right. I think he would have played heel in some territories. Now, would it have happened in Texas? I'm not sure. I kind of see a kind of an opposite situation where you maybe have a situation kind of like Owen and Bret Hart, where the younger brother turns on the older brother out of jealousy, that kind of thing, right?
You could do that one too.
Yeah, but boy, it's going to be tough to turn a Von Erich heel in Texas, isn't it? Oh,
unless your name is Lance.
Lance, yeah, I was just thinking that. For sure. I mean, Fritz was a Nazi and he's still a babyface there. Yeah. So, I mean, it's tough, but you get that initial run from David. Now, that pretty much takes the place of the whole Kerry run that you had in 1984. Yeah. And it's funny, the more research I do in that run, the more confused I am, because you always hear Flair talk about, he got the call saying that, Kerry's missing dates and stuff like that. And, he's just, obviously he was, under the influence of some things during some of the matches. But then I look at the records and some things, and it appeared that he did make his dates, which is confusing. So I'm not sure. Like, I just feel like it's typical wrestling, like from the 80s. There's so much kayfabe around it that you never know the true story. But I feel like this obviously it was going to be a short run, kind of like a Tommy Rich type of situation where you have that favor. I know, and if there was ever a time to put the strap on somebody, it's going to be that David Von Erich memorial event. But so if David wins the title, and let's just say even if he gets one reign, but he might have a couple reigns, he might have a run with Flair over and over again. Yeah. But do you picture Kerry, or I don't think Kevin's ever going to get, but do you picture Kerry ever getting a run with it as well?
See, that's the thing. It's if David could get it and hold on to it, because like I said, we know that basically Kerry's run was because David had passed away.
Yeah.
And part of me would say if David did a good job, I don't know if Kerry would, but then there's part of me that thinks, okay, also when you start getting into say 85 and 86, you start seeing some of these bigger, more muscular guys like Kerry starting to come in, because the different territories were trying to compete with the WWF and some of the muscle guys. So
yeah,
they would have went with it but see, again, that's the whole thing that, how many favors can you do? I mean, I know you had Terry Funk and Dory Funk and Jack and Jerry Briscoe and some of those older guys, but you got three brothers. It would be hard pressed. You can't strap all three of them up at once. There's got to be an odd man out.
Yeah.
And that probably would have been Kevin. So they may have given it to Kerry, but I just, when I went back and watched a lot of the matches, as I got older and YouTube and I started actually being able to watch stuff, you could definitely see that David was the better worker.
For sure.
David was the better ring psychology. And I don't know, and that's the other thing. Was it as much that maybe Kerry didn't miss the dates, or maybe he couldn't carry an opponent? These are all young guys, and that was the good thing about Flair and Harley Race. They could go into any territory, and if the guy wasn't quite as good, they could carry him in the match.
I agree. I think that's kind of what it is. I mean, and plus we've talked about it before. A heel world champion works so much better. To be able to work with all these guys and put them over and then have his escape clause as far as getting, disqualified or whatever to keep that championship. Babyface, really tough to hold that championship for a number of years and stay on top and stuff like that. And the money's in the chase with the babyface all the time. It's always in that. So I agree with you. I don't necessarily think Kerry ever gets that run. Who knows? Maybe that pushes Kerry to go to say a WWF sooner or something like that, where he can work in that bodybuilding style, right?
Let me even throw this one. Okay, so when was Kerry's accident where he lost his foot?
That was 86.
Okay. What if David doesn't pass away, becomes champion, Fritz goes ahead and lets Kerry go on up sooner, and maybe if he's on the schedule with the WWF doing all these towns, he don't have time to ride a motorcycle, and be in his backyard and never loses his foot.
I agree. That was an angle that I was going to go down to. Obviously, this family is just riddled with tragedy, and it didn't start with David. Actually, it started with their other brother, Jackie, and he passed away young. So there's always been that tragic thread with this family. But I really do feel like David was the one that really set the ball in motion for everybody, because he was going to be that what's the word for it? I guess white knight for the family. He was going to be the champion. He was going to be the one that brought the WCCW to prominence. Who knows how much power Fritz Von Erich would have had with the NWA if David Von Erich wins it, because he was NWA president at one point.
And that's the whole thing is, if this tragedy doesn't happen to David, then does Fritz even leave the NWA?
That's
you know,
right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that whole thing with that, because you said the White Knight. I'll give you one better. He's Jay White. He's a catalyst. The catalyst. The catalyst to what could have been. Maybe you just never know. And it is interesting because all these things with Texas, if Texas would have stayed together, because there you saw right there in those mid '80s. Bill Watts is doing his own thing. Fritz decides to do his own thing. And, Memphis is doing sort of their stuff and doing some stuff with the AWA. And then basically the only thing left of the NWA was Jim Crockett. Yes. How much more if Texas would have stayed together and stayed in the NWA, would, again, we always go back with Magnum when we were talking about that episode. What would it have done compared to the juggernaut the WWF was coming in the late '80s if Jim Crockett and Fritz and all this tragedy wouldn't have happened, could have stayed together? Because Fritz had all of his affiliation TV networks. Jim Crockett was on the Superstation. You would have had a lot more channels than Vince would have ever thought of.
Yes, and they had a lot more leverage and power that doesn't allow Vince to come in and strong arm them as well, right? I mean, you think about Dallas and World Class, that got weakened by all the tragedy that happened, and that's kind of what the road we were going down. Like, do the Von Erich boys get into as much trouble as they did if this doesn't happen? Do they resort to all the drug use? Do they resort to all the painkillers, all that stuff? Because they're not dealing with such a tragedy in this case, right? You're right. Does Kerry have the accident? Or, going to talk about the whole power of the NWA, now you have a Von Erich family that's going to probably be featured on Jim Crockett Promotions, on, of course, the Missouri stuff, different territories, things like that. So one of the complaints might have been back in '84 when WWF is starting to get that stranglehold on things, was they had these larger than life characters, right? They had a Hulk Hogan, they had the Paul Orndorff, the bodybuilder type. We didn't quite have that on Jim Crockett Promotions. We had Magnum, Magnum had the best wrestling physique because he looked muscular, but he looked like he could function, right? And he could go. Yeah. But maybe you had Nikita. That was the one anomaly, but that was later on. But in '84, all of a sudden fans are getting introduced to a Kerry and Kevin Von Erich who do fit that bill, but they can actually wrestle as well. I mean, you can argue that but I think inebriation was the problem with some of these matches for those guys. But so the fan that's like, well, I kind of like the WWF blown up guys style, but it's kind of cartoony and it's kind of slow. But I kind of like the NWA style because it's so fast and it looks so real. Oh, wait a second. Look at this Kerry Von Erich guy who's now getting in matches with, I don't know, Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair and Tully Blanchard. Man, okay, so I got the best of both worlds. Does that now give JCP and the NWA more power and leverage at that point?
Yeah. And the other thing, like you said, even if they could cross over, if they're baby faces, imagine Kerry, David, and Kevin come over to Jim Crockett and do 6-man against the Russians, talking about Nikita. You know, you could reunite instead of that Freebird, you would have Nikita, Ivan, and Crusher Khrushchev in some 6-man battles and stuff like that. And yes, Magnum had a good physique, but you know, Nikita's up there all puffed up, and Kerry gets up there and said, "Man, I'm just as big as you are." You know, I think that would be a great thing. And then you would have like, I don't know, I wouldn't say Crusher Khrushchev, aka all the other personas he had, but you know, maybe him and Kevin, or Kevin and Ivan, and you know, and David, and some of these different things you could have, or if you want to bring them in as heels eventually and turn them, you know, you had the Road Warriors and Dusty as that 6-man. You know, you could have that 3, or again, you could have 3 of them against 3 of the Horsemen at any given time. So many different possibilities that I think that could happen again if this one incident doesn't happen.
Or you even go with like David's the champ and exchange him back and forth with Flair. So you always got that thing going on. And then Kevin and Kerry are your tag team champs, right? Your NWA World Tag Team champs. Excuse me. And like you say, they're going up against the Road Warriors as heels or as baby faces. Can you imagine them, you know, getting in the ring with Tully and Arn and just being under that learning tree, and those guys walked them through matches? I mean, think about how good that would be, you know, those kind of feuds. And you have the whole interaction with the Horsemen and the Von Erichs. Then you pull the Freebirds into the mix and things like that, right? I mean, you just got a powder keg going that really, as I say, gives the fans of both, you know, like which I was a fan of both, but I'm like looking at the NWA saying, well, geez, man, I got everything here. I've got my Ultimate Warrior in Kerry Von Erich. You know, I've got the wrestling stuff that we got. We got a Magnum TA. We got a Dusty. We got a Flair. We got the Horse. We got everything. What do I need the other stuff for, right?
Yeah, and don't forget the Midnight Express and Cornette. You know, that would have been, you know, I know they spent a little bit of time in World Class, but to have it on the national stage like that, you know, and Cornette going off at 6:05 every Saturday night, talking about Kevin and his bare feet. I mean, I could just imagine the promo that he would come up about that.
Plus, you have the booking genius of Dusty, who would be smart enough to put a mouthpiece with those guys. That was probably the one weakness for the Von Erichs in Texas, is that ability to do a promo. But you throw a manager with those guys, throw a guy like a Paul Ellering or something like that with the Von Erichs. There you go. That takes away that side of it as well. And can you imagine? Yeah, Jim Cornette talking with those guys, and then you know you have these Greek gods and Kerry and Kevin going up against the Midnight Express, and you know, and then just all the skullduggery that would be going on with that. It's just it's along with that. The other thing I think of is you now have Jim Crockett, you have a Fritz who's running a very healthy Dallas territory, you have a Bill Watts in Mid-South. You have maybe Eddie Graham with the whole Florida thing. All 4 of those minds working together under an NWA banner. You know, that's a pretty powerful scenario when you got a Starrcade card you're about to fill, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing, because and like I said, I do think David could have been that catalyst as far as holding those singles titles, you know, or because the same thing that they played up in Texas, you know, with the whole Freebird thing, they made that feel like a college football rivalry, Texas versus Georgia.
Yes.
So, you know, what if he does come on, or even if he brings the belt back to Texas and shows it on their TV, you know, they could be fluid with that. He wins that U.S. title. You know, maybe he beat, you know, maybe he's one of those that beats Nikita and brings the, you know, the good old U.S. championship back to God bless Texas. I mean, you know, the stories just write themselves. And then Texas was also another one that was known for their foreign heels too.
Yes.
You know, so whether it be a Kamala or whatever, and you play that up and, you know, and all those different ones down there. So it would be, I think you could do a lot with it.
Well, and you think as well about the whole, like you mentioned, the United States title. So when when Magnum is transitioning over to the world title scene with Flair, then you have somebody like a Kerry stepping in against Nikita, like you say, a perfect USA, USSR situation. But you also have to think about guys like, say, a Rick Rude, who eventually went down to world class, and him getting in the mix with those guys, right? You know, Von Erich's against the R&R, Rude and Manny, right? You know, that'd be an interesting scenario too. So there's so many different possibilities. I know we always bring it back to JCP, but I do feel like the epicenter for the NWA was always going to be JCP. I don't think Dallas becomes the epicenter, but they get that more power and more cohesion where they can work together with those guys. Let's go to another angle here. Let's talk about, if David wins, is there a possibility that we see some guys with that NWA title that we wouldn't expect to win that title, maybe on some short runs? So I think of number one, you have the built-in feud with the Freebirds. I don't think you're going to have, you're never going to have a Michael Hayes as a world champion, but would Terry Gordy ever get a chance with that belt?
That one would be because, you know, when Bill Watts done his thing and changed everything to UWF, you know, he strapped up Terry.
Yeah.
So I could see them doing that, you know, that monster heel, that you put it on Terry Gordy and let him run wild. And that would definitely be something that you could see again, because the heel champion and then those guys. So I think that would be also, and I don't know if you're going to throw this out, but the honorary Freebird, do you think with the built-in feud, would Jimmy Garvin get a little quick run with it?
I don't think Jimmy would have got the run. But I do think they would have had one heck of a feud over it for sure. I think it would have probably transitioned to Jimmy getting that Texas Heavyweight Championship or whatever. Yeah. But I do think, yes, that's a logical opponent right off the get-go. Maybe even David's first series of defenses is against like a Jimmy Garvin as a holdover from that whole feud. But yeah, I love the idea of Gordy because number one, he's legit. Obviously, he has the Japan connection, so there'd be no issue with him going over to Japan and being taken seriously over there. The Von Erichs worked so many territories that some would say they may be burnt out territories, but also Gordy would have had a lot of respect amongst, like, say, an Eddie Graham in Florida, where Bill Watts loved him, obviously, because he was a legit tough guy. You know, obviously Fritz down in so now you have the voting people on the NWA board that would say, yeah, let's throw it on Terry Gordy for a little while. I mean, who knows what would have happened with Terry Gordy in that situation, right? And think of my God, that machine just holding that title and going against somebody like a Magnum TA for that title, and a feud that he would have with Dusty and guys like that would be pretty cool.
Oh yeah, yeah. And again, where you've got the stable, the tag team with the Freebirds, you've got the interference, you've got the DQ finishes, you've got all that rolled in, and you still get those combinations where you can rekindle that Von Erich Freebird feud again and run it through different places. And you know, it would, you know, I think it would be good. That would definitely be a good one.
Here's another name for you, and one that's always been associated with what ifs as well. And we could obviously do another episode on this too. But what about a gorgeous Gino Hernandez?
Yes. Because let's see, Gino passed away 86, 87?
I believe it was 86. It wasn't 85. I don't think it was as early as I think it was 86, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So yes, if David wins the belt in 84,
it was February of 86. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, if David wins the belt in 84, definitely could see Gino, you know, and again, he's got that Ric Flair style, good looking, cocky, you know, and it would be the same thing. I think he would do great with that title. And, you know, then I also think, because I know he was a heel, but, you know, then could they cross over with and maybe go down in again? We've talked about going to Japan, and already with Texas, you know, would you run Gino down into Mexico? and try to get some of that stuff and try to get more relationships down there. Like Flair used to go into different places, Puerto Rico and stuff like that. And how would those people, those fans, would they be more attracted to him than they would maybe the Von Erichs or something like that?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think of maybe a Gino being more of a short run, a transition type of thing, again, built-in storylines where you have obviously the feuds with the Von Erichs and stuff like that. You can work an angle with Chris Adams, where they had that famous feud as well. Also, I'm thinking the whole thing with the Horseman and Flair, because it's basically Gino's playing Flair in that situation. Yeah. And then you get another guy that we talked about that that was supposedly, nothing confirmed, but supposedly was going to get a run with that belt that would fit into this mixture nicely, because now you have instead of Flair doing the feud here, you have a baby face. But what about a Buddy Landell, say, against a David, and you get that change over the championship too?
Yeah, that would be another one, because you could bring Buddy in and do that same thing and not have to bring Rick in if you didn't, because he was very similar, and there was talks about that feud. So whether or not they would actually strap him up, but again, I think just like we were talking about Jimmy Garvin, it would definitely be a good feud. Definitely, or if you really want to mess things up, what if he is heel? What if, let's just say David's heel, and there's a rivalry also between Texas and Louisiana. What if he goes over to Bill Watts and David Von Erich against Junkyard Dog?
Yeah, you got that too, right? And he could play heel in this situation.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. If he could do that heel thing and do it, because there's some controversy every now and then between people in Louisiana and Texas. Some of them don't like each other. So, you play that Freebird thing and come over and talk bad about the people in Louisiana eating their gumbo and all that, and Junkyard Dog stands up for them, and I think you can make money on that.
You could, although even by '84, it seemed like that Junkyard was starting to get that reputation, and Bill Watts' shine for him was starting to go a little bit. But maybe
you get one good run. I mean, I don't think you'd win, but you could still get one little good run out of it.
You definitely could. But somebody else that pops into my mind now that you mentioned the Louisiana territory, is this a nice little way to get Ted DiBiase a run with the NWA title?
Yes, that would be. That would be, because, there was also some speculation at times that, because him and Flair had a lot of battles too, and there was some speculation that and they may not would have wanted to beat Flair, but again, as a transitional, they might very well strap him up to beat David for a transition.
And the nice thing is you can do it as Ted DiBiase as a heel in that situation too, which I feel like Ted DiBiase was better as a heel and then as a babyface. Yeah. And I mean, again, and then you get the whole butterfly effect. One, you have a world champion in your territory of Mid-South, which was a hot territory that unfortunately got hit with the problems with the oil industry, but you already maybe spark a feud with the whole Junkyard Dog thing that could sell out your Superdome card that you're going to have. But then you get your world champion, Ted DiBiase. Does that help the territory with survival at that point? And with the butterfly effect, does it maybe prevent Ted DiBiase from signing with the WWF? When you think about that, was such a major gimmick for the WWF, the $1 Million Man gimmick. I don't care what you say. I know he wasn't world champion there, but huge gimmick for them, right?
Oh, yeah, and that's a possibility. He stays there a little bit longer. And then we'll go a step further, is if they have the world champion there and they have some hot feuds going, maybe business picks up, and maybe Bill Watts doesn't sell to Jim Crockett, because Jim Ross and Tony Schiavone and all of them have pretty much, well, I don't know if Jim Ross really admitted it, but Tony Schiavone and some of those others said that was some of the final nails in the coffin that really bankrupt Jim Crockett when he bought the Watts territory and took on the whole debt.
Yeah, I agree. There's so many different things. We talked about the last episode with Magnum. We talked about a Sting, a young Sting, and how that would affect Sting. Well, how would it affect Sting if you do have the world champion in your territory, and you're building up this massive baby face in that character, or you have matches of Dr. Death against Terry Gordy for the world championship.
Right.
I mean, we saw what they've done with each other without the world championship, but could you imagine that feud going on in the mid 80s?
Okay, so what if he's NWA champion in Texas, and he's maybe went back and forth for Flair, he keeps it there, and then there's this guy called the Dingo Warrior who's in world class, and does he get a run with the belt and never go to the WWF?
No. No, that doesn't happen. They kick him out sooner. I would say though, I think you'd see a more desperate Vince in order to get stars and stuff like that, right? Yeah. I mean, something else you think of too. Well, I guess Piper would have been gone by that point because it was February 84 when David passed away. Piper was already hitting WWF, so I guess that wouldn't affect that. But that's another what if I'd love to do at some point is what if Piper didn't leave for WWF? What if he stayed after Starrcade 83 after that amazing match with Greg Valentine?
Yeah,
and they start the run with Piper. But that's another thing. Yeah, what's Vince's reaction to this? Does he make a play, or once I guess David's cycle's gone through and they decide, okay, he's had the run with the title, we're going to stick with Flair and these guys and stuff like that, or maybe they're higher on people like Gordy and DiBiase and stuff like that. Does Vince then make a hard play, like you say, in the 80s for the Von Erichs to bring them up there or something like that? Or does he try to buy WCCW and try to get that, something to counteract all this too, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing is because then you wonder, okay, Kerry had the body and the look that Vince definitely wanted.
Yep.
But then, would he have taken a gamble on a David?
I could see him being a manager or something like that, right? But who knows? Maybe David goes into more the whole booking side of things too, right?
Yeah.
You never know. You never know what's going on. That's the fun part about the what ifs and the frustrating part too. Like I said, I didn't want to go down too dark an alley with this, but I do think it has to be brought up. Obviously the tragedies that happened with this, but to me, I feel like the whole David situation was the powder keg that set everything off and caused that spiral for that family, including Kerry's accident and stuff like that, because obviously he was doing a massive amount of drugs and things like that. And that's a family that was in pain throughout their whole life. And you wonder, would that have happened if David's still alive or whatever, and what would have been if that was the case. But I feel like that family doesn't go through near as much tragedy as they did.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I agree because, not to the extent that it's happened to the Von Erichs, because that's almost like an anomaly. Mm-hmm. But, I'm sure you've seen families in your area or in your life or something that one tragic incident like that sets off a chain of events of other tragedies in the family, and I think that's something that we can all relate to. And it's like, does everyone else go down that path? Because like you said, the first child was, I don't know, maybe like a toddler or something.
He was like 7 years old.
Yeah, something like that. And, it was just a freak accident where then there were so many questions about David's too. You've got one story, well, it was an overdose. Then, it was a heart attack. It was a ruptured intestines because that's what was on the death certificate or whatever. But then also being in Japan, did somebody cover it up? Because, me and you've been on some other episodes talking about Bruce Brody. Sometimes in those other countries and those promoters, if they had any power at all, things might get covered up. So that's the thing. There were so many questions there, and I'm sure his brothers just had all these questions and different things that went through their life. And I just can't imagine the trauma and everything that they went through with all that.
And it's ironic you bring up Bruiser Brody because you got him on your T-shirt actually tonight, and that's one more name that I wanted to bring up before we close this off, because a lot of people forget, because Brody has always been known as this madman who just wandered around to different territories and burnt it and then left. But the one territory that he considered his home base, it seemed like that he seemed to get along with the bookers and all that stuff and have respect for, was WCCW.
Yeah.
And here's talking butterfly effect. Number one, it seems only natural that he would come back and have a feud with David over that world title. And does Bruiser Brody end up being an NWA World Champion? And number two, if he does, or he has a great run with the Von Erichs in Texas, does he end up in Puerto Rico, and does everything happen that happened with Bruiser Brody?
Possibly. That is a good question, because he loved to come back to Texas. They would bring him in, and he would have those feuds, and almost like just a mercenary type, because you have somebody like a Gary Hart or somebody like that bring him in, and that is a good question, because if Texas is successful and he's finding that there, does he feel like he needs to go to Puerto Rico?
Yeah, for sure. Is there a need, or does he say, okay, I got the run with the strap and it's time for me to retire? Who knows? But it's almost like he ended up down there because of burning bridges and stuff like that. But there's so many, you think about it, you could talk about maybe even a guy like Stan Hansen. People forget about him. I mean, he had the AWA run, but he's a big Texan. Would he come down to Dallas and battle the Von Erichs, or would you have Brody Hansen teaming up against the Von Erichs or something like that?
That would be fun. Yeah.
Or Hansen and Gordy going at it for the world title. I mean, it's mouthwatering to think of all the different scenarios that you would have had with this, but that's the fun of it. So you know what? I'm going to ask the viewers themselves, like, join in the conversation. Make sure you leave a comment down below. What do you think? Are we, as I always say, are we off our rocker with our assessments as far as what we think of the what ifs? Do you think David Von Erich would have become champion? I think that's pretty much a given that it was going to happen. But how many times was he going to be champion? Was he a transitional champion, or was he going to be a long-term champ? Was he going to be a multi-time champ? Who's his biggest foe going to be? We didn't even really talk about Ric Flair, but we know Flair would have been in the mixture there a bunch of times too. But that's just a given with Flair. But he has that Florida connection. You could always bring in a Barry Windham situation too, because he was down in Florida and battling Windham, and he was a heel down there. So there's a situation where Barry might get a shot at the.
Oh, I got one more that ties into our Magnum episode.
Yeah.
If he wins in '84, does Tully leave his daddy's and go to Jim Crockett, or does Tully just go up to World Class, and maybe Tully got his run there?
That was one I thought about too, and I was trying to think back in my head. When did Tully go to JCP? Because I know he in '84ish.
I know it's like late '84 or early '85, somewhere in there. So that would have fit in the timeline.
Yeah. Again, it feels like Tully was destined to be that champion.
Hey, what's the game that they play? The 7 degrees of thing with Kevin Bacon.
Yeah.
We need to start one with Tully Blanchard.
I think so.
He seems to pop up in all these things.
6 degrees of Tully Blanchard.
Yeah, there you
go. Oh man, yeah, but that's true. Or would you maybe have had, because of the amount of power that Dallas would have had, do you have a merger with Southwest Championship Wrestling and Joe Blanchard's thing, and you get that sooner with all these great talents and stuff like that. It's just there's so many different scenarios, and it's just unfortunate. It's unfortunate, number one, for the family that they've had so much tragedy that they went through. And I still say it to this day, Kevin Von Erich is the strongest individual I think I've ever heard of in my life to be able to survive what he has and still keep a positive outlook on life and allow his sons to be in the wrestling industry after all this.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing, the tragedy that the family, and it's unfortunate, but also it's unfortunate we just never got the chance to see some of this stuff play out because, I mean, you think about what the landscape of professional wrestling would have been like, to see these things. If David Von Erich, he was 25 when he passed away. That's what's that? It's just 39 years ago. I mean, he's still in his mid 60s, probably promoting or writing or producing or something like that, contributing to the wrestling world. Yeah. Would David Von Erich have had a son that would have grew up to be a wrestler? All these different things, right?
Yes.
Unbelievable. But Ted, I really do appreciate you joining me once again, and I'm really excited for you with your YouTube channel that you've got going on, The Heel Truth, and I mean you're doing some awesome stuff with some YouTube shorts, and so make sure folks go over there and check it out. They're YouTube shorts. It's going to take you no time to run through the garden and check them out. But
and then I will say through the analytics, I found if I keep it below 20 seconds, they seem to do better. So that's where I'm at. And also, if you're saying, well, why don't he put as much WWE stuff? I'll just be honest with you. WWE hit you with copyrights left and right. I got the one up with Dom slapping Cody, and that one got 5,000 or 6,000 views. Well, I can't remember. One of them got one, but he'd done a lot of views for me. But that was the only one that slid by. Everything else, WWE, they're worse than the federal government. I mean, it's like they're that. I mean, there was one I literally, when HIP finished uploading, I mean, it was less than 10 seconds. I had a copyright flag on it. Yeah. I mean, those guys are good. That's all. So Nick Khan may be bad for laying off people at WWE, but it's not in those guys who are staring at YouTube and just watching videos all day, because they're good.
Well, and there's a reason why none of my Wrestling with the 80s stuff is really focused on the WWE or WWF as of this point either, because they're notorious blockers, as we say. but hey, I'm glad we're exploring this. I'm glad this is your wheelhouse and stuff like that, because there's nothing better than talking old school wrestling with a major fan and a historian of it. So it's always a pleasure, Ted, and I'm sure we'll have you back for another episode of What If.
I appreciate it.
All right, folks, go check out The Heel Truth on YouTube. Subscribe. Go check out The Heel Truth on any of your podcasting apps. Subscribe there. Leave reviews. Leave 5 stars and support old Ted. And everybody else, subscribe to this channel as well for more great content. There's lots more coming up. Appreciate you joining along, and leave your comments down below. Take care.